Hi, welcome back to Storytime with Alex, reading chapter 6 now of The Last Wizard, the third book in From Allbyon to Britannia by Brandy Pearson. In the last chapter, chapter 5, Miles discovered that the keyring he'd taken was a flash drive and contained Sebastian Jones's book of spells. So they now have the warding spell, and they are heading to Pilgrim's Green to see if they can rescue Sebastian Jones. Let's see what happens. Chapter 6, Planning the Rescue and What Actually Happened. So the next day, off we went again to Pilgrim's Green. It was like a weird day trip. After all, it was our Easter holidays. Mum had even made us a packed lunch. We took the tube and again walked up from Wood Green, but this time we stopped when we reached the stream and looked for a way down, while keeping an eye out for anyone who might see us from the house. The bank at the bottom of the garden was too steep, so we crossed the road and saw that downstream the bank had a gentler slope, so that Ruth and I could get down to the stream bed and scramble through the pipe that brought the stream under the road. A local walking along the road asked if we were okay, and we told him we were looking for our cat. We showed him the photo of Misty, and that seemed to satisfy him. We took off our shoes, rolled up our jeans, and let ourselves down into the stream. The water was very cold, and we thought of Sebastian, bent down and crept through the tunnel. We emerged just along the border of the Blacks' garden. Ruth had gone first and almost immediately held up her hand, and we stopped. "There are fairies paddling in the stream," she whispered, and knelt in the shallow water. She started to whisper to tiny people I couldn't see, so I decided that my job was to keep a lookout. The cement bank of the stream was almost the same height as me, so I could stand up and peer over the edge. There was a hedge, but it was old and straggly, so that it was easy to see through to the bottom of the garden. When I first looked, the garden was empty, but after a while someone came out of the side door and down the steps. It was difficult to see clearly as the grass was long and full of tall weeds. There were even old tree branches in the way. The person drew nearer, and I realised it was a girl, a little older than me, with a basket of wet washing. There was a line hung up from one tree to another, and she began to peg up the washing. Surely she must be the girl from Ruth's dream. I was wondering if it was worth the risk of trying to talk to her when someone else came out of the house. This person had a second basket of washing and brought them for the girl to peg out. When the figure drew closer, I nearly cried out because I recognised who it was. She used to be one of our neighbours in the Albury Triangle. It was Mrs. Brown, one of the fraternity of the book in question being Sebastian's book of spells, which was now in that house. I stayed as quiet as I could. Mrs. Brown returned to the house, and the girl continued to peg out the washing. Then she stopped and started to whisper, much in the same way that Ruth was whispering, but looking at something I couldn't see that was sitting on the washing line. Then she looked at me and our eyes met. She put her finger to her lips to keep me quiet. Ruth stood up and looked through the hedge at the girl. "The fairies told me she was coming." "Is she the girl from your dream?" I whispered. "Yes." The girl dropped a long scarf, flicking it so that one end of it caught in a bush near to the hedge. She ducked under the washing line and came towards us. Then she bent down and whispered, "I'm Leia. Are you the girl who caught my dream? Have you come to rescue us?" "If we can," I whispered back. "Leia," I whispered to Ruth, "that must be why your dream was about Star Wars." "Star Wars," Leia said. "I've never sent out a dream before. I'm so glad you understood it. The wizard is tied to a chair in the cellar. Granny is up in the attic. I'm usually in the kitchen. They don't know I'm a witch." "How many people are there in the house?" I hissed. "The Blacks, Mrs. Brown. There's a whole bunch of others who come and go, about half a dozen of them. They're coming tonight, trying to do something to the wizard. Mrs. B wants to take his magic away. She's got a big grudge against him, but the Blacks just want him turned black. They all argue about the book. She wants to burn it. They want to use it. You know there's a warding spell." "Yes, we do, but—" Mrs. Brown called from the house. "Have you finished hanging that up yet? Come along, you lazy article." Leia stood up, gave us a rueful smile, and turned away. She finished off hanging up the washing, picked up the 2 baskets, and returned to the house without glancing back. "Have you finished talking to the fairies?" I whispered to Ruth. "Nearly. I won't be long." She bent down, listening. "They've offered to help us," she said to me. "Thank you. That would be very useful," she said to the invisible fairies. "Okay." Then she stood up and put her hands over my eyes. She muttered some words and took her hands away. "Why did you do that?" I asked, and then saw a tiny green person standing on the bank next to me. It waved at me and smiled. I looked around. There were several more minute green people by the stream. They were a little transparent. They did not have wings, but I had no doubt that they were fairies. "I can see them," was all I could think to say. "Good, then I said the words right," said Ruth. "Let's get back to Rose." We sneaked back through the tunnel and climbed back up onto the pavement. I was still processing being able to see fairies, and indeed that fairies existed. I'd not disbelieved Ruth exactly, but it was very different now that I could see them myself. We walked back down towards Wood Green, and I phoned Dad as we walked. I told him about talking to Leia and what she had told us. I told him about Mrs. Brown. It was clear that we needed to rescue Sebastian this afternoon before either she or the blacks had a chance to do him more harm. It was about 2 in the afternoon when we all met up at the cafe in a supermarket in Wood Green. Marco had the van he had borrowed parked in a nearby street and was the only one of us who looked as if he might be planning to rescue a kidnap victim. Father Joe was dressed in a very unclerical blue jeans and a green hoodie. We were in a hurry, but we needed a plan. The plan. First, Miles is going to remove the warding spell, then we'll go to the front door with Marco and Rose. When they hear from the rest of them, Miles will use an unlocking spell on the front door, one of the spells I'd copied into my book. Ruth is going to be in the stream bed to talk to the fairies. Dad and Father Joe are going to go to the side door and knock very loudly. Whoever answers the door, they're going to lure as many of them out as possible and let the fairies get them lost in their own back garden. This was what the fairies had offered to do when she spoke to them earlier. Then, they're going to go into the house and head for the cellar to rescue Sebastian. If possible, they're going to get him out of the side door and off to the van, which we parked around the corner. Meanwhile, Marco and Rose are going to head for the attic and get Leia's gran, while Miles stays by the front door. If need be, Rose can use some of her magic to send to sleep anyone they come across. They'll bring her back down through the front door and out to the car. Wherever Leia is, she will come with them. What actually happened? On my own, I walked up the hill towards Pilgrim Green and stationed myself behind the hedge on the corner of Bourne Road. There was a big bush growing inside the garden between me and the house, so no one could see me from there. I took the notebook out of my bag, took a deep breath, and started to undo the warding spell on the house. I'd practiced it in my room at home, and had learned to feel when the spell was lifted. I bent down and pretended to tie a shoelace, which was the signal. Then everyone else crossed from the other side of the side street, and we all entered through the front gate. As Marco, Rose and I went to the front door, Father Joe and Dad walked round to the side of the house. I heaved a sigh of relief. If I had failed to lift the warding spell, they would have been unable to step off the front path. As we approached the front door, we could not see anyone looking out of the windows of the front of the house. We heard Father Joe knock at the side door. There were footsteps and a male voice saying, "Who's that? Who's that at the side door? How did they even get around the side of the house?" The footsteps continued and a door banged. "Come on, Miles," said Rose. "Unlock the front door." I found the spell in my book, spoke the words and made the hand gestures. The lock clicked and the door swung open. As quietly as we could, we entered the house. We found ourselves in a large hall with wide stairs up to the first floor. I hung back, but Rose said in my ear, "Come on, we might need you again." We all crept up the stairs. We could hear some commotion in the direction of the side door and hoped everything was going well there. The stairs up to the second floor were narrower, and at the top landing there was another set of stairs, even narrower, that clearly went up to the attic. Meanwhile, as I discovered later, Vlad and Hecate Black were at the side door. It had a large pane of frosted glass. They had not opened the door, but were calling through it suspiciously. "Who's there?" Dad improvised brilliantly. "We're sorry to bother you," he called back, "but our dog has got loose in your garden. He's run off and we need to find him. Is it okay if we go and look for him?" The blacks must have been confused, knowing that neither people nor dogs should have been able to get round the side of the house. They opened the door. "Look!" Dad cried, pointing down to the garden. "There he is!" and ran off, calling, "Bruno, come here, boy!" The blacks followed, trying to call him back. Then, according to Dad, everything got strange. Ruth had not shared the fairy spell with them, so they could not see what the fairies were doing. Vlad Black went in one direction and Hecate in another, but they seemed to think that they were still together. Father Joe and Dad left them to it and came into the house. The side door led into a lobby with the kitchen was on one side, and that was where they found Leia. She pointed to a door which led down to the cellar. The cellar door wasn't locked because Sebastian was tied to a chair. He had duct tape over his mouth and more tape bound his arms and legs to the arms and legs of the chair. Dad told me afterwards he was so pale he feared that he might be dead, but he opened his eyes when they came in. Father Joe produced a Stanley knife from his pocket and they freed him. He could not walk, and Dad and Father Joe had to carry him between them up the stairs and out to the side door. They dragged him along the path and out to the garden, then along the road to Marco's van. Meanwhile, Marco, Rose and I were at the attic door. It was locked, and I used the unlocking spell again. I spoke it much more quickly this time, and heard the satisfying click of the lock. Inside there was a very old lady, sitting on a chair by a narrow bed. She looked up when we came in, but did not move. She looked confused. "Come on, dear," said Rose, going over to her and gently taking her arm. The old lady stood up, but seemed to be struggling to say something. Hesitantly, she started to shuffle across the room, but suddenly we heard a voice at the bottom of the stairs. "What's going on here?" shouted a Scottish voice, which you can imagine. I recognised the voice of Mrs. Brown, blocking the way down. The old lady looked frightened and retreated to her chair. Rose turned to confront Mrs. Brown. She fluttered her fingers at her and sang a little tune. Mrs. Brown crumpled to the floor, suddenly asleep. Unfortunately, she fell forwards up the stairs. Marco leapt down the stairs, jumped over her, and started to pull her out of the way. But then there was a shout, and a tall, skinny man dressed in black appeared. It was Vlad Black, who had managed to break free of the fairies and run back into the house, realising that something was up. He moved so fast that I did not have to her spell. He was up the stairs and through the door and banged it in our faces. The old lady was still in there with him. Leia had followed Vlad from the kitchen. We tried to get the door open, but Vlad had jammed something against it and we couldn't get back in. He seemed to be talking to someone. He was on the phone. Leia saw what had happened and was running up the 3 flights of stairs towards us. Vlad shouted from inside the attic, "Get out of my house, whoever you are! If you try to get in, I'll hurt the old lady, and my friends are on their way. They're only round the corner." Leia froze. "Go!" she yelled at us. "She's not lying. Get out while you can. Come with us," I called to her. "No, I can't leave Gran. You've got your wizard. Go!" We ran down the stairs and out of the front door. As we reached the gate, people were running towards us from the corner. One of the spells I copied into my book came into my head. I yelled it at them as loudly as I could, and the sound seemed to knock them backwards. We ran to the van, and Rose and I scrambled into the back. I fell over Sebastian, lying on a rug on the floor. He was still unconscious and smelled awful. Marco was now at the wheel, and Father Joe was next to him. Dad, Rose and I held on to one another as we sped off along the road. Marco circled around the block and back down the hill. We picked up Ruth and drove home to our house. So, a qualified success. Will they go back for Leia and the old lady? We shall find out. And yeah, is Sebastian Jones okay? Join me next time.